Hello everyone, you're watching Oneindia News and this is our weekly show Global Chit Chat. As India celebrates the 75 years of its independence, the country is yet again reminiscing its past in 1947 when the country was torn limb by limb by the British Raj and the partitions took place in Bengal and in Punjab. And places like that saw a carnage and slaughtering of people as the people from both the countries, from Bangladesh and from Pakistan, they tried to come in and go out at the same time. So today, before we delve into the geopolitical sphere, we're going to look back to the time of partition and talk about the oral history that was chronicled and how it holds significance till date. But before that, let us just introduce our guest on the show. Hello, sir. Mr. Tridivesh Singh Maini, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Hello. So, sir, can you just tell us about the significance of oral history that holds significance for, chronicling the history of our country and also how it tells us about what really happened and how it actually kind of gives us a view of what really took place during the partition?
First of all, I would like to, commend you for flagging a point which is often forgotten, that it is Bengal and Punjab which suffered the pangs of partition. Of course, the scale, the differences, everybody has their own. That is, but it's very important. And what has happened for very long is also there has been a one side says we suffered more, but I think partition essentially is partition. I mean, there is no, to leave your homes and everything else, the trauma, there is no, it can never be compensated. Now, coming to your point about oral history,
Mhm.
you see, very long after partition, those who had actually witnessed the traumas, they were not in a position to really narrate their stories. Now, it is through the efforts of individuals like, Urvashi Bhutalia and many others from the 1990s onwards, that the oral history part, conversations with survivors, that has been highlighted more. But before that, I think for mainstreaming partition, the interest in partition soon after, uh, the credit goes to Sadat Hassan Manto, to Khushwant Singh,
Mhm.
trained to Pakistan. You know,
Mhm.
they deserve credit. And then, of course, you have this from the late 1990s, 2000s onwards, a greater emphasis on oral history because there was a realization that the survivors of partition are fading away. So we have to sort of chronicle their.
Document their, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that has started. Now, in the last 10 years, you've had another wave. Apart from books, there are partition museums. So you have
Mhm.
one in Amritsar. There is talk about one in Bengal also, a similar
Mhm.
partition museum.
Mhm.
There have been projects which have archived, the oral histories, partition 1947 archive. That is one, and then of course you have what we have been talking about. A very nice initiative, Punjabi Leher, which is a YouTube
Mhm.
channel, which
Mhm.
has helped in reuniting families. So this has all been this current 5 to 10 years has been bolstered by as a result of social media. So you don't have to be an academic, you don't have to be English speaking. For very long, there was also a slight, the narrative was a bit limited also. So now, and I think it's more effective because if you're actually going to get first-hand experiences, you have to get them in Punjabi, Urdu, Bengali,
Mhm.
whatever language. And
Mhm.
so when you directly interview the survivors, rather than first somebody interviewing and then somebody else translating it, the impact is very different. Now,
Absolutely. Mhm.
the other part. So, what is essential about the oral history now in the last few months is that one, it has helped in highlighting that yes, uh, at that point of time there was a lot of hatred. Uh, Insanity took over and things like that. But you know people who actually go back, they say now, they have started saying that, obviously, there is an urge to visit their erstwhile homes. That is there on both
Mhm.
sides. That's the
Mhm.
first thing. Second thing is that even if the partition had to take place, uh, the way it has happened, the acrimony, the bloodshed, that was not essential. And even the strained relationship between both countries, because pre 47, a lot of survivors actually you know, like I was part of one such project, and in that one of the points which is clearly highlighted is that people lived amicably. I mean, there were obviously you don't have to have uniformity, but people lived amicably.
Yeah.
And then the other point which is also there is that even after partition, soon at least on in the context of the western borders between 50s and 65, before the 65 war, interactions, people to people contact were much more. Because obviously, first of all, the visa system came into place in 52. Before that,
Mm.
there was a permit system for visiting. Then, level of trade, the number of trade routes which were open, that was much higher. So I think there are lessons to be drawn for the present and for the future, and this emerges from the oral history, because we often restrict the oral history interviews to what happened during partition, but it's also important that post partition, you know uh,
The
some of,
experiences.
yeah, and some of the survivors actually,
Mm.
some people have been fortunate to go back. Some went right after,
Right.
not long after partition. Even their
Right.
experiences are important
Mm-hmm.
to break this thing about acrimony and the biases on both sides.
Right. And sir, you also have written a book, Humanity Amidst Insanity, right? And where you have mentioned that you document some of the nicer stories, not just the bloodshed, but about how basically, even though they were pitted against each other, how Pakistanis and Indians chose to help each other. So, can you just talk about the book a bit and how you chronicled some of the stories?
So actually, at that time, there was no notion of Pak. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you were just at that point of time it was United India. So
Mm-hmm.
you know, so
Right.
now technically at least. So now the first time in this context, I think this initiative, this talk about acts of Samaritanism, this was
Mm-hmm.
begun actually by Ashish Nandi.
Mm-hmm.
They had done a project, and he was the one who highlighted that there were a number of instances which proves that it was more the politics, it was not the people. So you have instances of religious places actually being used to rescue people. You have priests actually rescuing members of another community. We often use faith, often is used as the pretext that this is what causes, but there was interfaith understanding also, right? And interesting things. So there were actually a lot of, the belief was that we'll go for a few months. Once the
Mm-hmm.
violence is over, we'll come back. Right now,
Mm-hmm.
that is unthinkable of today. And there are certain instances where even people were asked to, like non-Muslim Sikhs and Hindus, they were asked to hoist the flag of Pakistan. So they're very interesting,
Mm-hmm.
and the common man didn't even understand this notion that what this divide is going to lead to. Of course, a story like Toba takes in that explains this best. I mean, there is no better explanation of the insanity of the times and how this line was drawn and things like that. But I think also we need to look to the future now. I think, as I said, at least IR people or policy makers, they have their own way of looking at things. But there are some low hanging fruits, and there is also on a humanitarian basis, at least certain categories of people should be allowed to meet more
Right.
freely. And I may also point out that I think one important initiative recently is that the uh, Akal Takht, which is the highest temporal seat of the Sikhs. Uh, the head of the Akal Takht, he actually, after first a prayer was organized for all those who died during partition. And he also highlighted the point about the suffering of both Punjab and Bengal and how all faiths suffered. So
Mm-hmm.
even during that prayer, I think it was not only about one community, and but also about the suffering, and also that at least people who are over a certain age,
Mm-hmm.
actually everybody should, at least the common citizens, on for certain reasons, like whether it's pilgrimages, whether it's the generally for conferences and all, there's often been talk, but at least one category of people over 75 who want to pay
Visit.
obeisance
Mm-hmm.
at important religious shrines and things like that. That all should be allowed. Plus, visiting their erstwhile homes, meeting the
Yeah.
friends if
Mm-hmm.
any are there, relatives. So these are low-hanging fruits, even from an IR
Right.
perspective.
Right.
So I think we
Right.
need to. The past needs to be understood from different. There are some positive layers which we need to make use of for the future. I'm not saying that you can overcome. I mean, the broad narrative is obviously very. It's an unfortunate and traumatic sort of phase, but there are some small lessons. I mean, some small silver linings which need to be used for the future, and which will especially benefit. I mean, benefit the region as a whole, but certain regions which have felt the pangs and the angst even more much more.
Right, right. And speaking of modern time pangs, let's come to Russia-Ukraine scenario. So basically, after the war, post-war, India's oil import was significantly increased from Russia as the prices were discounted. But India's crude oil imports have, in this month, in July, the last month, in the month of July, it was reported that India's imports has decreased. Russian imports has decreased, and it was increased from Saudi Arabia. So, do you think that the entire shift in the oil market it can affect the global oil market in certain way, or what do you think is going to happen in that scenario?
So I think we need to look at two things. One, we need to look at the U.S. statement yesterday
Hmm.
that that it understands India's
Hmm.
constraints, that it cannot suddenly change its foreign
Hmm.
policy orientation vis-a-vis
Hmm.
Russia. That is the first,
Hmm.
which is very important. But also, this uh, move back towards Saudi Arabia
Hmm.
and a slight reduction in oil imports from Russia is also important because. If you look at the months after, I mean, after the Ukraine crisis, right till June, there was a
Hmm.
sudden increase.
Hmm.
And it's not just India; many other countries benefit. So China was doing it, and that impacted Iran.
Hmm.
So when you look at it, first of all, I think it's about one is the economic part of it, and second is also there is some foreign policy signaling, because obviously even with the Middle East you
Hmm.
cannot suddenly give a that you're because in the long run if you look at from business point of view, we'll have long term contracts. Now they can reduce the amount of oil. They can't suddenly all of a sudden change
Right.
and give up on the. So that is one part of it. But I think what is going to happen is that uh, India, obviously, Saudi Arabia remains an important source, but countries like Iraq, which had of late become important suppliers of oil, I think they will face some impact as a result of this, and even Africa that is going to be hit. So that is one part of it, and I don't now. A lot will also depend. You were talking about otherwise in the oil markets and all. A lot will also depend upon this Iran deal now.
Hmm.
Because that will impact. Uh, there are two schools of thought. One is that it may go ahead now, but some people are still saying that Iran certain conditionalities it wants to be totally fulfilled and all
Right.
that.
Hmm.
Now that is what we need to see. But what the overall trend is that within the Middle East, certain countries which had become important suppliers of oil, probably there will be a dip in their supply of oil. I mean, India will look at its oil needs to other countries, and Middle East, Africa will, and even in fact, India had also reduced while in between. The oil imports from the US had increased. It reduced those
Huh.
also during this period. So that is
Right.
another thing. So I think it's basically diversification. It's not depending upon one source as such, but there's a reality to it, as I mentioned, that they're long-term contracts. You can't do it
Hmm.
in a slam bang sort of manner. It's done gradually, and especially in this current situation, you may
Hmm.
want to hedge a geopolitical situation, but the geopolitics is so complex that sometimes it's beyond you to hedge it.
Right, sir. And coming to our neighboring countries, so on Wednesday, Taiwan demonstrated its most advanced fighter jet to to actually show that they are capable of resisting China. But do you think that if China, in actuality, decides to invade, do you think that Taiwan would have the capability to resist the country, or do you think that it will be actually backed by US, or US is going to play the same game as it did with in the Russia-Ukraine scenario?
So that I at that point of at this point of time, I think it's posturing, and there
Hmm.
could be some moves. So we did discuss, like earlier we discussed about the sanctions.
Right.
Economically, China will try to squeeze Taiwan. You've had the drills. In fact, Taiwan has said essentially they were responding to the drills, right?
Hmm.
And
Right.
I think Taiwan also got emboldened not just by the Pelosi visit, but also by the statement of Kurt M. Campbell, who's the
Hmm.
coordinator of the Indo-Pacific, in the National Security Council of the US. He has also spoken about the US supporting Taiwan. So the US will keep the dialogue with China open to
Right.
try and ensure that this conflict doesn't flare up. But Taiwan has also said that they're prepared for any conflict, but this is more about seeing their own military capabilities. So
Hmm.
in case in future China ups the ante, and China, in fact, Taiwan is also an official statement has come that they don't want any sort of conflict with China. So
Mhm.
I think this definitely. I don't think Beijing will be want. I mean, they would want a perception that it's just twiddling its thumbs, it's doing nothing. So they
Mhm.
may try and up the ante, but to an extent, because they have their own challenges at this point of time. And there is also this whole talk about when you look at IR, it's also,
Mhm.
you need to look at this thing about, I mean, it doesn't totally fit in, but this whole notion generally of imperial overstretch that you don't want to go beyond, I mean, what you can handle at this point of time. So you
Mhm.
can impose sanctions, you can
Mhm.
up the ante, you can have
Mhm.
military drills, you can try and create more problems for Taiwan, but all out, because see, even if it does go, I think the US would be could be possibly far more proactive if there's it will be involved here, invested here, especially if you look at the free and open Indo-Pacific initiative as well. So I don't think full-blown
Done.
conflict is.
Right.
Is on the page. Oh, okay, and we truly hope that it's not on the not coming in the future, the Chinese invasion. We truly hope that China does limit itself to just sanctions if in that case, right? So thank you so much for the information that you've imparted us today, and also happy Independence Day to you even though it's a late one. Have a good one, sir, and catch us again next week on Global Chit Chat. Thank you for watching.